Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We're here today prepping for an amazing class, and so far we've got Ron and Arlene and Michael and Eva, and we'll see if anybody else is joining us on Zoom. As always, welcome to everybody. We usually have 2 or 3 times the number of people on Zoom watching on YouTube, so welcome to everybody watching on YouTube. We had a great food festival last weekend. It really was amazing. I don't know how many people came, but I'd say at least 4,500, maybe more. That's guesstimation. And the food was delicious. I had the knish. Usually I have a latke, but I forgot to get them early, and the line's kind of long, and I had other things. So I got a knish, some matzo ball soup, and the chicken shawarma made by Will Christopher was outstanding, and I am a very picky eater, and it was outstanding. So I heard the chopped liver was great. I heard the latkes were great. So, I heard a lot of the food was great. I didn't get to taste everything. The atmosphere was amazing, and I hear the beer was delicious. The fun zone was great. All the kids and families were there. The veterans booth was amazing. So it really was a wonderful class. So for today, as I mentioned before we went on YouTube, we're going to talk about what I spoke about this week, Monday, at Ollie. So I teach her, once a semester, and it was great. And so we went over biblical history, which we kind of did before, but we're going to do again because I redid all my, you can see here, that's not the wrong one. That is not the right one, but I'll get the right one up. Good to go. It is. Oh, there it is. So I got a better packet. Okay, there we go. So we're going to talk about biblical history, and we're going to begin with just a little look-see at the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, the Tanakh, the Bible. Now, when we talk about history, we can also talk about Savannah history, because this Saturday, Ann Woolner is going to be speaking at services and maybe at lunch a little bit about the new book about the Jews of Savannah that she wrote that is going to be coming out soon, but we've already got it sold here, so make sure to look for that. And here we have the origins of Judaism. There's 3 sections to the Bible. The first section is the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The second section is prophets, which the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The first 6 books just continue the story from Deuteronomy. So basically, what we do here is we go from Deuteronomy, and then we go to Joshua next. So they're all in order, all the way to Kings 2. So the end of Kings 2 is the destruction of the Second Temple. That's the end of the continual history going from the Genesis story. Then these 3 are the major prophets because their books are bigger, longer. They're in chronological order too, but they overlap with Kings. So Isaiah comes first, but he overlaps with Jeremiah and he overlaps with Ezekiel. Then you have the 12 minor prophets starting here, and they are in chronological order as well, but they overlap with Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel as well. Then the last part is Ketuvim, which is all the extra stuff. For the purposes of biblical history, this is the most important book in writings because that details the Jews, how they're living in Israel in the 5th century. There are also a couple of books that have kind of a historic tinge to it, but they're not really used for history because it's more like stories about somebody living at a particular time. So what we're going to look at is the biblical era. And as we can see, we're going to have a timeline here. If I can get this working. Should be working. 1 second. There you go. we're going to have a timeline here. This one is the one I like best, even though it's from a long time ago, but you can see that's one, but there's another timeline, and this one has different dates. So you can see this one has Noah and Isaac and Abraham and all that, but the dates for Moses here is 1393 and the Exodus from Egypt around 1313 BCE, whereas up here it has the Exodus in 1312. So they're pretty close, but there's a lot of differences. So if you want a copy of this timeline, I will send it to you, but we're going to start with the first story, which of course is Genesis. So Genesis is the foundation of Earth, of the universe, 5,786 years ago. That's if you use the biblical timeline. Then we see that the first human beings are, no team help there, Adam and Eve. But we know they're not the only humans, because Cain, when he's cursed to walk the earth, says he's afraid he'll be attacked by the other people. So obviously there's other people. The line will go from Abraham and Sarah to Seth, their third son. And their third son will be the progenitor of the Jewish people, monotheism, because 9 generations later, you've got Noah and the flood. First time, by the way, we see meat being eaten. And then 10 generations later, we've got Abraham. Now, if you go on this one over here, they have Abraham as the date of born 1813 BCE. Is that correct? This is all guesstimation. They do use certain points in history to try and help it, but we don't know when Abraham was born. Certainly believe it's sometime in the 18th or 19th century BCE. And as you can see, Abraham was born before Noah dies. So that's how long, because you think Noah's 10 generations before Abraham. However, they lived so long, 800 years, so you can overlap with your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. So we don't know if Abraham knew Noah, they don't mention, but Abraham is the beginning of monotheism as we know it. So Abraham is born in a city called Ur over here. And in one of the most important, if not the most important moment in Jewish history, he leaves. So he's here, he goes somewhere over here, I think, or over here somewhere, and he lives in Haran, and then he will get a note from God and say, go down here, go down to this place called Canaan. So Abraham and Sarah are living in what would be the Babylonian Empire. So they're living in a very powerful nation. They go over here and are living in another powerful, and depending on the time period, it could have been the Hittite Empire. And then God says, go to this place. What empire is in Canaan? What empire is in Israel? No empire, because it's a backwater, middle of nowhere desert. And God says, this is going to be the Holy Land. We still don't know why this is the Holy Land, but this is the Holy Land. And so he moves there, and he and his wife create monotheism. They stress belief in one God, that also it's a God that cares for you. And we will see here that Abraham's line goes to Isaac, to Jacob. This is the line of the patriarchs. Then it'll go to the 12 sons of Jacob that become the 12 tribes. And while we know the story, again, we can't be sure of those dates. The farther back you go, the more guesstimation it is. We do know there were migration patterns. So what was so important about Israel back then? The answer was, as I said, nothing. There was no oil. It's not no empire was there. But most importantly, it is missing something needed for an empire, and that is water. If you want an empire, you have to have a water source that is consistent. Israel does not have it. The Jordan is a little stream. Egypt has it with the Nile. Mesopotamia has it with the Tigris and Euphrates, but Israel never has. So what is important about Israel? The only thing that was important, of course, is called Canaan or Canaan back there. The only thing that was important at all about Israel or Canaan is the trade route and also the military route. So let's look at what I mean. The two great empires in the area, the two greatest empires of the time are who's ever controlling Babylon, Mesopotamia, and who's ever controlling Egypt. So Egypt and Mesopotamia, these are the bad guys, not the bad guys, these are the tough guys on the block. China hasn't got started yet. But Egypt and Mesopotamia are also the most scientifically advanced societies with the wheel and with writing and architecture and agriculture. They are the height of science and math and astronomy of the time period. They are the most powerful armies. And they hate each other. They're always at odds with each other, seemingly, and if not only at odds, they're often going to war with each other. Now, the trade continues, obviously. So, now, here is Mesopotamia right here. It can be any of this area, but, here's the Tigris Euphrates, where they meet. Egypt is right here. So the best way to fight would be this way. We're going to go fight this way. What's the problem with fighting this route? This is the Arabian desert. Think about sand dunes and no water. So crossing the desert is perilous. Crossing the desert with an army is almost impossible, although, of course, we know from the movie that Lawrence of Arabia, great anti-Semite, was able to convince the tribes people to do it, but they're the ones who live in the desert. So no army can go this way. You can go through water. That's certainly a way. But again, taking armies on boats is very dangerous because of the boats and the water conditions. So the best way to get to one another, if you want to fight, you got to go through Israel, right here, because the Jordan is enough to keep it from being desert, but it's a small little area, and that becomes a trade route, but also a military route. So if you want to be a powerful country, the worst place in the ancient world would be right here, Israel, because you're in between the two strongest bullies and you've got no water. And that's going to be very important as we talk about that in a second. So Abraham moves with Sarah to Israel. They live there for several generations until what story? Joseph and the coat of many colors. And I know did we talk about this recently, by the way? I don't know if we did, but
I don't think so.
Joseph of course, is sold into slavery by his brothers. It's something we all thought about doing when we were kids if we had brothers. Something our brothers probably deserved when we were kids, but we didn't have enough chutzpah to do it. But yet Judah and the 12 brothers give him into slavery. They think he's going to either be killed or be a slave. He goes into Egypt. He becomes a big macher thanks to God's protection and power. He invites his family into Egypt, and they live there for generations until a new Pharaoh takes over, who is not very supportive of these people, and he enslaves them. And so they become slaves in Egypt. This is the story we all know. But now when they get there, we don't know exactly where they were, somewhere in this area, but we have no archaeological evidence. They're in Egypt, and we know the story, the 10 plagues, Moses telling Pharaoh, let my people go, and they leave. Now, we do not know the route. I have not on this one, but another thing, I have like 10 different routes. We know they end up here for like 38 years. So they're there for 38 years. We know that. One of the thoughts is they go all the way down to the bottom and come up. We don't know where Mount Sinai is either. There's a lot of mountains there, could be any of them. But they do end up in Kadesh Barnea. They're all together. They form the religion. And then they move on into Israel. So they now move into what is Canaan or Israel. Here's another route, very similar but a little different than the other one. But you can see all routes we know end in Kadesh Barnea because we know they're in Kadesh Barnea. This one has, where does it have? It doesn't say where their Mount Sinai is. So now when they move into Canaan, a lot of people think the Israelites were one homogeneous select group of people, and that is not true. We don't know how they were living as slaves. We read as they leave, they are in tribes. So it is a group of tribes working together, not one nation. They come together to fight and for certain other things, but they are independent of each other in many ways. So when they settle into Israel, which is Canaan at the time, obviously, I'm just going to call it Israel, they move into tribal areas. You've got Reuben and Manasseh and Gad on one side of the Jordan. Those are the ones who said we went, well, actually, Manasseh and Reuben were, but God goes over there too. Part of Manasseh goes to Israel. You've got Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, Ephraim, Dan. Dan actually starts at the top and comes south. Benjamin, Judah, and Simeon. So they settle as tribes. Then they work with each other. Sometimes they get along, sometimes they don't. They probably do some marrying. Yes, Michael, you have a question?
I mean, we know from the Torah that, you know, where the Jews crossed into Israel, but, you know, all these divisions, how do we know that? Is that in the book of Joshua or?
Yeah, this is in the book of Joshua. It's in the book of Judges, and it's in the book of Samuel. I think at the very beginning of Samuel. So again, in First Samuel. So they're all living tribes. Now, is this exactly how it was? This is by professors and sages. They think this is how it kind of divvied up. Now, the people are, the tribes are doing fine. You know, you're fighting, if they have any, they're friends with neighbors, but they skirmish with neighbors. They're a little Canaanite troops, small little towns or villages fighting each other. No big deal. They have something called judges, powerful military leaders who come and help sometimes. But this is going to change. See it? Because what happens is somebody moves into the area. They move into this area. Can't go that far down. I'm not exactly sure, but it's like this. They move there. And this is a much more powerful entity. This new group of people has iron. They are warriors, organized warriors. So it's more like a military instead of a group of warriors fighting. So they're much better at it. And they're, easily taking on these tribes one by one because the tribes are not organized in this fashion. So the people asked Samuel to give them a king. The first king is Saul. There's a reason he was chosen by Samuel. If you look at the map, what is the smallest tribe on the map? It's Benjamin. Benjamin is the least powerful tribe at this point. So Samuel picks a person from Benjamin and makes him king. Now, what's the analogy? My favorite analogy here, it's like a libertarian becoming president of the United States. A libertarian has no connections or no power in Congress. So there may be one libertarian senator and 3 or 4 congressmen or women, but he's got no power. The president of the United States literally as a libertarian can't get anything done because Congress doesn't listen to him. And that's what happened with Saul. Saul was tall, he was good looking, he was brave, he was smart, but he's from a very tiny tribe, so he did not have the connections. Plus he went insane, which never helps, although sometimes it does help, but in this case it didn't. So he is murdered, ends up killing himself, and or was it Jonathan who killed himself? I think it was Saul. And who takes over? David. And King David unifies everybody. He unifies the tribes and they defeat the Philistines. He puts his capital right over here somewhere. That's Jerusalem. It's right in the middle. So most of the tribe, it's right in the middle of the tribes. Simeon's going to disappear, by the way, eventually. So, and he builds the capital, and David conquers a lot of area. Some say all the way to the Tigris Euphrates. Now, how can David be a powerful king when we already talked about how Israel is the worst place to have a kingdom because you've got Egypt on one side and Mesopotamia on the other. The only time you can be a major kingdom in this area, not counting modern times with technology, which is so much more important, you have to be creating a kingdom when Egypt and Mesopotamia are having issues at the same time. And both places are having droughts or civil war or blight or other issues. If they're both having issues at the same time, I'll put it here because you can't see, then you can create a kingdom. And that was exactly what happened with David. Egypt was in a down point. Mesopotamia is at a down point. David's able to create a kingdom. It is not going to last long in a major form, but it'll last through David's time and some of his son Solomon. Solomon, of course, becomes king after David dies, and he is Solomon the Wise. He's not a warrior, he's a negotiator, so he's allowed to build the temple. So the first temple is built by Solomon. No evidence of this, except for maybe if you go on into the tunnel tour. Has anybody been to Israel and you go on the tunnel tour? You go to the bottom of the Western Wall and you see a giant stone. It's one of the biggest freestanding stones or whatever in the world. And it says in the Bible that Solomon was building these giant stones. So that is true. There are stones there, but then again, if the Bible was written later and people saw the stones, they could always say, call them Solomonic stones. But Solomon makes negotiations. Now, both Solomon and David, although talented, the Bible, again, let's remember, is a how not to book. And the more important you are, the more prominent you are, the more you're going to make mistakes. It's teaching us that we who are mere mortals make mistakes, because if King David and Solomon can make mistakes, so can we. So David's mistake is obviously very famous. He sleeps with a married woman, which is not allowed. He's married too, but again, you can have multiple wives. And what we see is a real essential moment in Jewish history, which people don't always realize. David being punished for committing adultery and doing something else is amazing, because in other societies, the leaders were above the law. Nobody's going to arrest Pharaoh for committing adultery or committing murder. He's Pharaoh. He's a God king. David does something spectacularly terrible. First of all, he sleeps with a woman, which we know is wrong, but it's going to get worse. She gets pregnant. And everyone knows her husband is off fighting a battle. So David comes up with a brilliant idea. He brings Uriah's legion back to Jerusalem so Uriah can sleep with his wife, and then this son will be born a little late, but it still can say it's Uriah's. However, Uriah comes back and he will not leave his men in the field. He said, I'm not going to go back to my house and sleep with my wife. None of my men live in Jerusalem area. They can't do it, so I'm not going to do it. So David's got a serious problem now, because a woman is going to have his baby. It's not his wife, and she's married to somebody. If she wasn't married, he probably could get around it and marry her, but she's already married. So he sends Uriah on a suicide mission. He doesn't kill him per se, but he puts him in a place where he knows he's going to die. And so he's cursed, basically. God says what's going on, and the first 20 years of his reign are excellent. The second 20 years are brutal. That son dies, he gets depressed, a son is going to overthrow him, he ends up being a feeble old man, is taken care of and in pain. So David, the most talented person in the Bible, pays the price for arrogance and for basically, I don't know if it's called murder, manslaughter. Now, Solomon's crime is not as overt. Solomon marries 1,000 women. And a lot of people say it's because of his libido. It is not. Although I'm sure it was impressive, obviously. But he's making treaties. So instead of going to war, he weds all of the daughters of these surrounding kingdoms. Either they're paying tribute to him, or they're negotiating treaties. And so the problem is he has 1,000 women in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's not that big of a place, and none of them are Jewish. And they're creating havoc religiously because they all have their own religion that they're promoting. You can't kill them because he's wise, it's illegal, and plus, if their daddy's healed what's going on, he may have to go to war. So it creates havoc. But still, it's a kingdom. For 80 years, David and Solomon ruled. What happens next? I think we talked about, we'll say a basic story. Solomon's choice of son to be ruler is Jeroboam. And Jeroboam is approached. Now, most of the tribes now are living up here. So basically, all the tribes by this time are pretty much living up in this area, right here. You got 10 tribes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I think Simeon may go up there, 10. Or Reuben, 1. Yeah, so anyway, 10 tribes are in this area, up here. And you got one tribe down here, Judah. Benjamin's kind of been absorbed into Judah. The most powerful tribe in the north is Ephraim, and obviously the most powerful tribe in the south is Judah. So one day, the 10 northern tribes send an emissary to Jeroboam and say, your dad taxed us heavily to build his palace, to build his temple, to do all these things. We'd like you to lessen the taxes. Pretty simple request. And Jeroboam goes to Solomon's advisors, and Solomon's advisors say, you need to listen to them. There's a storm brewing. We overtaxed them. We really need to give them a break. But then Jeroboam goes to his buddies who are going to be his advisors, and they all say, how dare the north tell you what to do? You are king, you do what you want. So I believe he beheads the emissary, and he tells the north he's going to increase taxes. So what happens? There's a civil war. And unlike America, oops, I forgot to erase the thing, sorry. Erase the thing. Unlike America, oh, that wasn't the thing, that's just a map. Unlike America, they do not unite. At the end of the war, you have a new country, Israel, and a country, Judah. So we have two Jewish countries at the same time. They're not called Jewish yet. Two Israelite countries at the same time. Ron.
Yeah, the name Israel, when did it first come in as Israel?
Sorry.
And who gave it that name, and what does it mean?
Well, of course, now we know the story of Jacob. Everybody know the story of Jacob and what did he do? He fought what? He fought an angel, right? Everybody know that story? He's sitting on the rock. Angel, he fights the angel, and he wins. So basically, the angel, maybe the origins of vampires, the angel is being held by Jacob. He's holding the angel who needs to get to heaven, or something's going to happen. He can't be around during daylight. And so Jacob says, I'm not letting you go until you give me a blessing. And he gives him a blessing, and he gives him a new name. He's going to be called Yisrael, which means like El is the name of God, and Yashar is kind of like means straight. It means a lot of different things. Upright. It means, basically a upright person. So that's what Yashar is. So they'll put them together, Yisrael. And this is the name of Jacob. Now, who is Jacob? Obviously, Jacob is the father of the 12 tribes. So back then, he may have been considered the father of Judaism. And so that's how they choose their name. They choose their name from basically the father of Judaism. And so I looked it up here for you so you guys could see it. I'm going to look it up for you. There you go. Yashar, right here. Upright, and El is the name of God. So for those of us who are Superman fans, what is Superman's father's name? Jor-El. El meaning the name of God. Obviously, the people who created Superman were Jewish, because what's Superman's real name? Kal-El, also with the name of God. So it's so they choose Israel as the name, and these two countries live next to each other for 200 years or so. Sometimes they get along, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're annoyed with each other, sometimes they go to war with each other. Not like massive war, but more skirmishes. During this period, Judah will always have a descendant of David as king. It'll be from the year 1000 to 586, 87, over 400 years, it's just going to be the line of David. Israel is going to have a series of kings. A king, his son will be king, that either the son doesn't have any more kids or he's overthrown. So they'll, over 200 years of its existence, they'll have a series of kings. Most of them aren't that great. Some of them are really terrible. Most famously, Ahab, who married Jezebel. Jezebel's name is even to this day used with negative connotations. You do not see many girls being named Jezebel, just put it that way. So they are coexisting. Sometimes Judah is paying not taxes to Israel, but what's the word where you control your, what is it called? Tributes, paying tributes to Israel, because Israel's much stronger. But what we're going to see is we all know that there's now, by this time, baddies. There's bad, not baddies like evil, but there's some baddies on the block, because we know there's always going to be baddies in Egypt and Mesopotamia or Babylonia. They're both this. So a new empire is formed right over here. It's called the Syrian Empire. And the Syrian Empire is taking over everything, the Persian one. So they go into Israel and they come in and they take it over. Boom, it's gone. And there are 10 tribes there, hence they became known as the 10 lost tribes. Now, what happens to the tribes? We don't know for sure. Most likely, some of them moved down to Judah for their distant cousins that have the same religion. So some moved down there. A lot of the rest are scattered. Now, what's really important we're going to see here is the way Syria deals with its captured people. And we're going to see later why it's important that Judah survives. Assyria goes in and they go to a town and they take the people from the town and they send them all to different places, because they don't want all the people together because they think they'll cause trouble. So you're sent everywhere. So the 10 tribes either disappeared there or went down south. This is around 720, 725, 730-ish BCE. And now this is also the end of tribal Judaism, probably, because the 10 tribes are moving down and now they're all meshing with the tribe of Judah. So they know which tribe they are for probably many generations, but eventually nobody's going to know their tribe, or at least at some point. We don't know exactly when that happens. So Israel is no more. And as I mentioned, Israel was stronger militarily than Judah. So the Assyrians should have easily been able to take out Judah. And so a lot of the Judah, you got to take the major city. They go to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's on a mountain. It's a walled city on a mountain. So and I'm not a military guy, but how do you take a walled city on a mountain? What's the easiest way for you? Ron, you're a military guy. All right. The answer is probably you just wait. Surround it, wait. They got no water, they got no food. They're going to starve, and we don't have to lose anybody, because by the end they're going to be surrendering or they're going to be too weak to fight, and we're just going to walk in. So that's what they do. They surround the city the best they can, and they wait. And they wait. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And nothing's happening. The guards still look fine. The people are not begging for food. It's a miracle that they're able to hold out for months without food and water. And so they just say, listen, we don't want to stay here forever. Pay us some money and we're going to go. And so they're paid off and they leave. Hooray. It's a miracle that Jerusalem was saved, and thus the kingdom of Judah is saved. Now, what happened really? The answer is there's only 4 great kings in Israel's history, in Judah's history. David, Solomon, and the third one is Hezekiah. So what Hezekiah did was he knew there was an underground river. So he had his people dig underground tunnels to connect the underground river to Jerusalem. So they had water. And if you have water, you have everything, because you can plant gardens. You can grow enough food for everybody to be stable. They're not living it up, but you can eat, people can eat a little bit. Cows or sheep or goats can eat a little bit. Chickens can eat. So you can last a long time if you have a minimal amount of food and water. But the Assyrians didn't know this. They thought it was a miracle. So this is a story in the Bible. Obviously, it's not true. It's a story to show us that Hezekiah was smart. Until they found it in the 19th century. Archaeologist named Benjamin Warren found the underground tunnel. And today, if you go to Israel, you can walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. But you can't walk through it during the winter because it's filled with water. And in the summer, it gets as low as the ankles, as high as the knees. But it's there. And they even had writing from the time of Hezekiah. So that is true. That's how they survived. So it's pretty interesting. It's one of those aha moments where the Bible, so often in Israel, they try and disprove the Bible. That's kind of what archaeologists would do, although it's changed a little bit in recent years. But this one, they proved it. So Hezekiah ensures that we survive and we stay Jewish, because if the Syrians had taken Judah over, people would have been spread out, and that probably would have been the end of Judaism. Next, we have the Babylonian Empire that defeats the Assyrian Empire. There's always a new empire, usually bigger and stronger. The Babylonian Empire defeats the Assyrians and then comes in and destroys the Second Temple, takes over Israel, or what was Judah at the time, and all the Jews are sent into Babylon. Now, this should be the end of Judaism. Because in ancient times, if your country's, gods were tied to their land. And if you were defeated, it meant their gods were more powerful than yours. So you just replace your sun god with their sun god. And if you move to their country, you just take their gods. It's pretty simple. So we don't know what happened to the Jews in Babylon. We just know they stayed Jewish, and they probably became more Jewish. This is probably when Judaism is cemented forever. Because if you're living in Israel and your God is tied to the land, that's great. But if you are moved somewhere else, there's every reason to get rid of your God. And now we can see that the Israelite God was not a God tied to the land. They didn't believe their God was defeated. They believed they were the ones who made mistakes. So this is what we see an incredible group of people who go to another country and keep their own religion. Now, again, we don't know exactly what happens in Babylon, but we know one thing, and that is the Jews who were taken out of Israel, probably the elite, all were allowed to live together. So the Assyrians spread everybody out. That would have probably been the end of Judaism, but the Babylonians kept groups together. And so they stay together and they stay Jewish. So that when the Persians overtake the Babylonians, they're Jewish. How do we know this? Because the Persians differed from the Babylonians, just like the Babylonians differed from the Assyrians. The Persians wanted the captors to go back to their home, and they paid for it. And they came to the Jewish community and said, listen, we're going to pay for you to go back to Judah. We're going to pay to rebuild your temple, because we think if you go back home, you're going to be happier and you're going to pay more taxes. Just don't rebel. And so we don't have evidence of the Persians saying this to the Jewish community, but there's evidence of them saying it to everybody else. And so we just assume the Jews were allowed to do the same. So Cyrus, who was the one who was the emperor of Persia, was kind of like a messianic figure to the Israelites, because he said you could go back now. So what we're going to have now is people with the option to go from Persia, from what was Babylon's now Persia, to Israel, to Judah. Which Jews do you think left what is now Persia to go back to the middle of nowhere? The Jews who left probably were the adventurers, or the people who may have been in debt, or the people who didn't have the best jobs and figured they could do better. So that's probably who went back, because Persia, again, is a scientifically advanced place. And now they're going back to the backwards and see their hillbilly cousins that have been there for the last 50 years. And the people going back were probably a lot more educated. Eva. So the elite probably stayed in Persia. The rest went back, kind of built the temple, but they didn't do a great job, because in the 5th century, Persia sends a scribe and a governor to Judah to kind of get things back rolling. Ezra's the scribe, Nehemiah in Hebrew is the governor. And they reorganize and make sure the temple is stable, and the country is autonomous for hundreds of years. For maybe 200 years, it's autonomous. So they pay their taxes, they're doing their thing, and everything's fine. However, what do we probably assume happens to the Persian Empire? They're overthrown. There's always another empire. And this next empire may have been the greatest empire of all time. And that is the Greeks. Now we think of the Romans as being more powerful, but in terms of the effect on the future of the world, no other people influenced the world more than the Greeks. Because we're talking theology, philosophy, math, science, architecture, fashion, literacy, roads. It is a giant leap for humanity. And we can still name some of the Greeks. That's how impressive, because when we think of the Romans, we can remember Augustus and Caesar. But when we think of the Greeks, who do we remember? Plato, Aristotle. We remember their geniuses. That's who we remember. And so Alexander, who takes over the world by 32, something Michael tried to less success. He dies and the country's divided. But while he was taking over, he was very realistic. So he didn't want to have to fight every single city. So he told countries, if you just say, oh, you owe allegiance to me and pay taxes, I'm not going to attack you. And that's exactly what Judah did. Judah said, oh, bye, Persia. We're part of Greeks now. Because the writing was on the wall. And it was amazing. Why? Because everybody likes stuff. And who had the best stuff in history? The Greeks. They had a lot of good stuff, as we mentioned. Everything was better. The food was better. The trade was better. They had the entertainment was better. It was just a true giant leap for humanity, and they loved it. Everybody loved being Greek. So Alexander dies, obviously, at 32, so he doesn't get to enjoy his empire. And his empire is divided into several sections. For our purposes, the two are very important. The general Ptolemy takes this purple area. The general Seleucid takes the green area. I don't know if it went that far. So those are the two. And as always, who's in the middle? The Israelites are right here, right in the middle, right where they connect. Perfect place to be. Right in the middle of, now at the very beginning, it's not a problem because Seleucid and Ptolemy are they're generals together. So they, I think, got along pretty well. But afterwards, we know who's going to fight each other. Who's ever in Egypt and who's ever in Mesopotamia, that's who always fight each other. That's just how it is. And so sometimes the Seleucids controlled Judah, and sometimes the Egyptians controlled Judah. But generally, Judah was thriving until in the 2nd century, something terrible happens. The first such occurrence, the king of the Seleucid Greeks, Antiochus, from our history, that was not what we called him, goes into Judah and says, you can't be Jewish anymore. First ever moment in which we see religious persecution. He says you can't be Jewish, and he sacrifices pig's blood to the god of Zeus and their temple. He's restricting them from holidays and all whatnot. Some of the Jews didn't care because they liked being Greek, but other Jews did care, and they lead a revolt headed by first Mattathias and then his son Judah, and they become known as the Maccabees, the Hammers. And the Maccabees were zealots. And the story I always like to tell is they would go into Jewish homes when new babies were born, and they'd hold the family possibly at knife point. And what did they do? Did they steal anything? No. Did they hurt anybody? Not really. They'd circumcise the baby boy and then leave. Because circumcision denoted you were Jewish, and it couldn't be changed. And a lot of people probably weren't circumcising their kids because they like to be Greek, and Greeks like to be naked. And you make deals in the baths, and you make deals in the Olympics. So being Jewish was very obvious. And so, but the Maccabees do something amazing. They kick the Assyrian Greeks out, kick them back, and they take control of the country for the first time since the destruction of the first temple. So the Maccabees become very famous for guerrilla warfare, as we're going to see Jews do later. Now, to be perfectly honest, the Seleucid Greeks had another issue. They were having some skirmishes with a tiny little group of people called the Romans. So that may have taken some of their focus away from this little area they controlled that they really wasn't that important. If you don't know, that's a joke, because the Romans were really powerful and they're going to take everything pretty soon. So we have our own country. It's great. There are some issues. One of the issues is irony, because the Maccabees are fighting against the Greeks. The Greeks were so popular that my dad's Hebrew name is or was Alexander. Alexander is not a Jewish name. It's not a Hebrew name. It's obviously Greek, but he was so popular that Jews but the Maccabees, their children ended up with Greek names, Alexander, Janus, because their children, and they even became a little corrupt at times, and they assimilated as well. And they did something that you're not supposed to do. Moses, we've all heard of, Moses was not the religious leader of the Israelites. He was the political leader. Aaron was the religious leader, the priest, Michael.
Sorry, this was not a good time for me to cut in with this
That's
question.
perfect. Every time is perfect.
But, we've gone through this Jewish history and, the land and, bringing it to contemporary times, where are the Arabs?
Well, again, Arabs are just probably descendants of the original people who lived there. There's nothing called Arabs yet.
Okay.
Because Israel's not going to be
Right,
founded
600.
for another
Yeah.
700 or 800 years. Now,
Yeah.
there are people living there, obviously. There's lots of people. There's Jews, there's Romans, there's Greeks. It's mostly the Jews who are living there at this time, but there are others. Now, the Arabs, that denotes probably people living in Arabia at this time. So
Okay.
those are the desert people, probably what it is at this time. I don't even know if that word is used yet.
Yeah.
It comes from Arabian desert.
Yeah, because you go back to the story of Abraham, two
Right.
wives, and
But yeah, there were other
and all
people
that.
there, definitely
Yeah.
other peoples. I mean, we're just telling the Jewish story here, but of course, we're a very small people.
Yeah.
But
But
you
they had
had,
no impact.
so
Okay, that's fine.
people living there who would have been, there's descendants of all the different cultures, the Moabites, and all these different cultures. Canaanites are living there with their different types of gods. But it's mostly right now it's controlled by the Jewish community at this point.
Okay.
And so the Maccabees do something they're not supposed to do. They decide they're going to be the priests and the king at the same time, which is really not allowed and really upsets a lot of people who are not happy with their rule. And during the rule, they do something really terrible that may be the only time Jews have done it, but we've been on the other end. And they forcibly convert peoples near them, which is going to bite them in the tuchus big time, because they convert a people called the Idumeans. And these Idumeans become Jewish, but they're always considered like second-class Jews. However, there's a certain Idumean named Herod, who is not happy about being bullied because he wasn't really Jewish when he was a kid. And so eventually the Romans take over the area without a shot. Basically, there are two Hasmonean Maccabee descendant brothers who are arguing and they don't know who's going to be in charge. They ask the Romans to mediate, and the Romans are in charge. But they have like Jewish governors for a while. But Herod gets on good terms with a man named Octavian, who was one of the co-emperors. Now, most people probably thought Mark Antony was going to rule if he wanted. But we all know that Mark Antony proved to be nowhere near as capable, maybe as a military man, but not as a ruler. And so Augustus, or Octavian, becomes Augustus after he has Mark Antony killed, and he takes over. But he takes over, and who does he know who lives in this area, who was kind of supportive? This guy named Herod. So when Herod says, listen, I want to be, governor of this area, he says, okay, you're governor. And Herod is a ruthless man, a cruel man, who kills Jews left and right, kills his own children, not wanting somebody to overthrow him. But he's a great builder, so he enlarges the temple. He builds Masada. He builds the Colosseum in Israel. But really cruel, and so he takes over. Now, during this period, we'll finish the last part next week. Sorry, guys, I went a little over. So we'll talk a little bit about the contemporary period of this end of the biblical age. Now, yes, Ron?
It appears to me that the Jews, even their trip through the deserts into Israel, they never had real peace.
And that isn't, I'm sorry, Ron, keep going.
No, I'm just saying that it never seems that they were able to enjoy their lives peacefully.
That is an excellent point. And we have to remember, we tend to think of the big moments and talk about them, the wars, but on a daily basis, people are just living their lives like everywhere else. I mean, there's lots of wars and skirmishes all over the world, just like there are today. If we talk about us today in America, we've seen terrorist attacks. The Middle East is at war. Europe's at war. Africa's at war. There's skirmishes. There's people being murdered in the streets in certain places. Savannah's had some crime issues. So there's always going to be crime. But Jews, they lived their lives like everybody else. And sometimes they were good times, and sometimes they were difficult times. The more difficult time for Jews comes later, probably in the last 1,000 years. That's much worse. Compared to other people. Like at this point in history, we're like anybody else. Jews are not having more issues than anybody else. Unless if you're an empire, you're going to do better. So Jews are not part of empire yet. So, but you're right. We tend to, as Jews, talk about all the bad stuff. But they had autonomy under Persian rule for 200 years. They had 150 years of really good times under Greek rule. So they had a lot of good periods there. But it's an excellent question. Now, as for what's coming up, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Saturday, Ann Woolner will be at services talking about her new book about Savannah Jewry. She'll talk a little bit about services, but more right after services. At lunch, you can get a copy, an autographed copy. It's been a couple years in the making. We're so happy to have a new book out. Then, as for services, a week from Friday, I want to double check that. Yeah, there will be no Friday night services at all at Mikveh Israel. We're going to be having no, it's not a week from Friday. Is it a week from Friday? When is it? Let me double check. I thought it was a week from Friday. I think it is. I think this is wrong. 21st, I think. Yeah, the 21st. A week from Friday, no services online or in the building for Friday night because we'll be at Congregation AA. We do a joint service twice a year for Sunday school. Are there any other announcements? All right. We hope everyone has a wonderful week. There will be no class next week. I'm sorry, something has come up that I have to be at. Actually, 2 things I have to be at, or 3. So unfortunately, I will not be able to lead services. I have to do an unveiling. So we'll have it 2 weeks later. So we're not gonna have next 2 weeks. I'll keep sending out emails and reminders next 2 weeks because I have the unveiling and then that's Thanksgiving. So thank you for being amazing. Thank you to all the people who were here with us on Zoom. Thank you to everybody watching on YouTube. And we look forward to seeing you guys in 3 weeks for the Wednesday class that shall not be named. And we'll continue the story of biblical Jewry then. So you guys have a good one.
Rabbi,
Talk
thank
later,
you.
guys.
You
Hopefully
too.
we'll see
Thank
guys.
you.
Hopefully we'll see you
And
this
happy
weekend.
Thanksgiving.